Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the North Carolina Local Government, Tribal and Local Government Census event hosted this afternoon by the North Carolina Office of State Budget and Management. My name is Bob Coates. I am the Governor's Census Liaison here in North Carolina, and I'm also the coordinator for the North Carolina State Data Center Network. For those of you who don't know, the State Data Center program is a partnership between the US Census Bureau and every state to support the use and implementation of census data throughout the decade. I'm joined today by my counterpart, Dr. Michael Klein, who is the state demographer for North Carolina and also our representative to the Census Bureau's partnership for federal and state population estimates and projections. And so we'll serve as your hosts and moderators for today, but I would like to welcome you all to the event and to let you know what we're going to be covering today, maybe give you a little background as we get started. So as you may have already heard, the 2020 census data has begun to be released. The apportionment data was released earlier this year, and as expected, North Carolina saw good growth, and we gained another seat in the House of Representatives because of that growth. But the data that has been released so far has just been the state level data. And now we want to know when tribal and local governments can begin to receive their data, how that data might look a little different than data we've received from previous censuses. And if you have challenges or concerns about your census data, what the process is like to challenge those census counts going forward. So with that being said, we're very lucky to have some experts from the US Census Bureau headquarters to speak to those topics during a very busy time for them. So we want to say a big thank you to our speakers in advance, but we also want to make the best use of their time and the over 530 attendees that have registered for this event. So we'd like to cover some basic ground rules. So the presentation today is being recorded and it will be posted on the Office of State Budget and Management, that's OSBM. It will be posted on our website. That web address is osbm.nc.gov. Now you will be muted during the presentations, but if you do have questions, any and all questions regarding census information, operations, we'd love to hear those. Look for the Q&A link. It's sort of the cartoon bubble on your screens that will have a question mark in it. Submit your questions using that link and we will get those asked to our speakers at the appropriate time. Now, as we mentioned, the speakers today will be focusing on when we'll see our local data, that's the redistricting information, how the data will look a little different, that's the presence of the new confidentiality policy that the Census Bureau is implementing, and the challenge process, that's the count question resolution program. However, if you have additional census questions, we'd love to hear them. That can guide us as we set up more of these presentations in the future, but just understand if time doesn't allow, we may not be able to get all questions asked during the presentation. We will get written responses to your questions, and those will be posted with the video on the OSBM website. That's osbm.nc.gov. Now, let's see. Let's go ahead and get into the presentations for today, just to make the most use of our time. We'd like to begin today with James Whitehorn. James is the chief of the Census Redistricting and Voting Rights Data Office, where he manages the redistricting data program and the Section 203 language determinations required by the Voting Rights Act. He began his career at the US Census Bureau as a geographer in the geography division, working and eventually leading the effort on the geographic support to the redistricting data program, as well as the statistical areas program, which includes census tracts and block groups. Before joining the Census Bureau in 2006, James worked on contract for 5 years at the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice as a Geographic Information Systems Specialist. James holds both a BS and a BA in Geography from Penn State University. So with that being said, please welcome James. James, take it away.
Thank you, Bob. I just want to go through today. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak to this audience in particular. The local governments are not someone that my office typically is able to reach out to directly, but they are important users of the data that my office produces. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that we've got a moment here to go through some of these specifics about the redistricting data. I'm briefly going to go through a little bit about the program itself and some background information, but then I'm going to spend the majority of my time describing the products that you can expect to receive from the decennial census for the redistricting data products, talk about the way the data is going to come out and when we have a change from our usual operations that's in place. And then I'm also going to try to demystify a little bit what we call these legacy format summary files, which you'll learn about as we go through the presentation. So first, I want to do a little sort of level setting around the redistricting data. And as Bob talked about a moment ago here, the apportionment numbers have already been delivered, but it's important to note that the apportionment numbers are just state population totals. So they don't have the characteristics, they don't have lower levels of geography. They are useful on a statewide level for determining the ideal population for statewide offices. But that's really sort of the limitation of what they can do. As you can see here, the apportionment counts have two numbers in them. There's a resident population count and a federally affiliated count overseas. And the redistricting data is actually, as you can see in the who is counted row, is the resident population only. And that's because the federally affiliated count overseas only have a state designation. They don't actually get counted down into that local geography that's so important for redistricting. Redistricting creates data from the state level all the way down to the census block. The census block is the smallest piece of geography for which the census produces data. And so that gives you the fine granularity that you need to build redistricting plans, to understand neighborhoods and to understand your city or your county or other jurisdiction. We'll give you the race and ethnicity detail and some housing characteristics. I'll go into more detail about that. This will be protected by the top-down algorithm, which is the Census Bureau's method of applying differential privacy, which Michael will talk about. And we're doing something different this decade, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But just so you're aware, we will be releasing the redistricting data in its legacy format summary file version on August 16th or by August 16th, and then we'll be doing our DVDs, flash drives to official recipients and our data.census.gov website for the public and the states by September 30th. The redistricting data program itself at the Census Bureau is a fairly simple program. We're required by law under Public Law 94-171 to run a nonpartisan program that allows the states to identify the small area geography that they need for conducting legislative redistricting. So before the census happens, we conduct a couple programs that allow the state to provide us input on what will be the eventual blocks structure for the 2020 census blocks, and collect the precincts and wards that are needed by the state for doing redistricting. We also collect legislative and congressional districts after they've been redrawn, but that's to make sure that we have current boundaries to include in our other surveys, so we're always producing data that's of value to the states. The third requirement of the program is to deliver the tabulations from the census in a timely manner. By law, that's supposed to be no later than 1 year from Census Day, which would have been April 1st of 2021. Of course, with the delays that we've experienced due to COVID and a couple other processing changes we put into place to be able to accelerate our ability to produce our congressionally mandated apportionment counts or constitutionally mandated apportionment counts, we are having a delay in being able to get that data to the state and public. We did already deliver a big piece of the 2020 census data, which is the geography. This, as part of the redistricting data release, we published geographic products to help support the eventual tabulation release. We produce shape files. Those are the files that go into geographic information systems to allow you to more easily manipulate the data on a computer. And then we have reference maps. I find the reference maps can be very helpful. We do county block maps, which is actually a series of maps for every county in the country that shows enough detail that you can see every single census block that is involved with that county. And the reason why I always highlight that one is after the 2010 census, I had several conversations with some small jurisdictions. They had budgets of around $500. They were told by the state that they had to redistrict and they did not have GIS resources. And so what they were able to do is take these PDF files of these maps, and they were able to print them and then use our data.census.gov, or the older version of what is now data.census.gov, to pull down tables of their data and do an old-fashioned pen and paper redistricting. So I think they're very useful, and they have their place in the universe of geographic support products. We also have block assignment files. Those are just listings of every block in the state, and then the geography that's associated with it. So if it's the place table for the block assignment file, it would have every block in the state and then the place geographic code associated with each block. Then also we have name lookup tables. These can be associated back to those block assignment files to give you the plain English name of what that geographic code stands for. And then block-to-block relationship files. These are crosswalks between the 2010 blocks and the 2020 blocks because they aren't the same. We replace the blocks every decade, so this gives you that relationship file should you need to have to do some sort of analysis across both decades using those as the base. If you have worked with the census redistricting data before in 2010, the data that we're producing this decade should look very familiar to you. These first 5 tables are all exactly the same as what we produced in 2010. We have the race table, we have the Hispanic or Latino and not Hispanic or Latino by race table. Then we have a voting age version of both of those tables. We have a table that is housing counts per block, and it has an occupancy status of vacant or occupied associated with it. But then this decade, we've also included a new table. That's that table P5 you see on the screen. It says group quarters population by group quarters type. There has been a movement over the last decade and a half where a lot of states now reallocate people from what we call group quarters, which are things like correctional institutions for adults, nursing facilities, college student housing, military quarters. They move people from those locations either completely or they move them to a previously known address. And so just to better help those states who have those state statutory requirements, we've included this table. It provides just total population by group quarter type, but it comes out with the redistricting data so that those states who need it have that tool available to them right away. And so if you peek under the hood for these data sets, this is what you will see. When you open up the race table, you'll see a table where in the census, any respondent can choose one of 6 races. They can choose 2 of them. They can choose all 6. And so what we do is we report their choices exactly as they have made them. So if they only selected one race, then we would report them in this population one race area. If they selected 2 races, we would report them in the 2 or more races, and then we report them in the combination that they chose. We continue to do this all the way down to reporting those people who have picked all 6 races as their self-identification. The table for race uses the universe of total population, meaning we're measuring these or counting these or tabulating these out of the total population. And then the voting age version is the same structure, but we're using a universe of the total population 18 years and over. So we're only looking at that subset that is of voting age. The other 2 tables, which have Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino by race and the voting age, very similar. The only difference here is that Hispanic or Latino is not a race, according to the Office of Management and Budget that controls how the federal government gathers and reports statistics on race and ethnicity. They consider it an ethnicity, and so anyone who says they are Hispanic or Latino in these tables gets automatically added to the Hispanic or Latino category. Then everyone else who said they were not Hispanic or Latino gets iterated exactly through all their race choices, as I mentioned in the previous table. And again, we use total population for the main or the total table, and then for the voting age table, we use the total population 18 and over. The housing and group quarters tables are actually quite simple. The housing table just has total population or total housing unit count, and then they break it out by occupied and vacant units. And then the group quarters version has the total group quarters population total, and then broken out by the group quarters type. Are available at the census block level, so that finest level of geographic detail that I mentioned before, or as being the building block for all other geography in the census universe. So where are we today? I know we're waiting for the tabulations to be delivered, and there is a process that we sort of use this infographic to try to describe when we announced that we would be able to produce all of the data that we intended by September 30th to give states a date against which they could plan. The first thing this is what we had to do after we completed the apportionment counts. We needed the apportionment counts as an input to this process. And so from there, this is the pathway. So we wanted to ensure that all the records were coded to the most detailed level of geography. That work is now complete. We then need to do characteristic editing and imputation to make sure that every record in the census, whether someone skipped a question or whether there's something that's invalid about the way they've responded, is all corrected to make sure that everyone has a valid characteristic for all major characteristics in the file. The types of things you'd see here are, like I mentioned, if someone had skipped one question, we would have to impute the response to that question. If someone has entered, the example I always use is their birth date is 1971, but they say they're 5 years old. We have the tools and techniques to identify which is the correct one and then to correct the other. Or if they say that they're married and they're 50 years old and their spouse is 5 years old, we have the tools and techniques to be able to make sure that we can get that corrected as well. This step is very critical to the overall quality and accuracy of the decennial census, and this is where we are today. We're working through that process. Once that completes, we can then move into applying our privacy protections to make sure that we're protecting our respondent data. Michael will talk a little bit about the techniques we're going to use for the 2020 census. And then once they're done applying those privacy protections, we move into our tabulation, where we tabulate and review all of the redistricting data in multiple formats. Then we create our physical media, load and test our web-based systems, and then we get that data out no later than September 30th. So what can people expect on September 30th? We'll have two things. One is DVDs and flash drives with an integrated browsing software that allows for intuitive browsing of the data. It has some custom extraction tools, so you can extract large data sets that you might want to use to then load into a geographic information system, like all blocks within state for the redistricting data, those types of extractions. This is what goes to the official recipients, and I'll talk about them at the end here, but this is our delivery to the governors and the legislative leaders in the state legislature, the people that were legally required as part of Public Law 94-171 to make deliveries. The Data Explorer web tool is Census's primary dissemination tool. This is our website where people can go. It works much like a shopping site, except instead of picking, pants of a certain size and a certain color, you go in and say, I want the redistricting data, I want it from 2020, and I want it for blocks, and I want all blocks in state, and then it will allow you to either view, map, or download the data. But as I went through this timeline, you heard me say about tabulate and review all redistricting data in multiple formats, and then creating those media and the web-based system. In looking at the schedule and the production that we have, and knowing that there was a dramatic impact on the states by the delay in our ability to produce this data and get it out to the states, we were looking for something we could do to sort of lessen the impact. And we recognized that there was a product that we call the legacy format summary files that's available in between those two stages that we could share at that time with folks. Now, I want to be very clear about a few things. The product was always part of our 2020 census product plan. Our plan was originally to release this along with those DVDs and that web tool, that web-based tool, all at the same time. So that way the full package of materials and data were available. And the reason why we wanted to do that is because the legacy format summary files do require additional handling to properly extract data in formats that you would be familiar with, that look like familiar tables for specific levels of geography. But this is something that's been around for a while. We provided it to states since at least Census 2000, and then in a slightly different version in 1980 and 1990. It will be fully reviewed and cleared for publication by August 16th of 2021. As a matter of fact, these are actually the files that we're going to use to create those data disks. So we'll make another transformation of these files to integrate it with that browsing software to make those DVDs. So it's the same data as what you get in September. It's all the PL 94-171 redistricting data. These are all just different formats, and they're coming out at different times. We do have data available if people want to practice working with it and try to understand it. It's from our 2018 end-to-end census test. It's available for designing and testing redistricting systems. It is for Providence County, Rhode Island, but it does have the structure you need to really understand how to work with the data. What you get with this data is each state will have one zip file, and each zip file will be 4 text files. Those text files are the geoheader, which contains all the geographic information for every level of geography for which we've tabulated data for the state. Then data segments, and the data segment 1 will have, or each data segment has 1 or more tables on it. Data segment 1, as you can see on here, has table P1 and P2. Data segment 2 has P3, P4, and H1. And the data segment is new this decade because we added that group quarters table. We needed somewhere to put it, so we've added data segment 3. So it's very similar again to what we did in 2010. Another difference we did to try to make it easier to use is it's now all pipe delimited. Last decade it was fixed width for some files, comma delimited for others. Now it's all pipe delimited to make that process easier. Also, we've added a geocode field. So if you include that when you extract data from the file, you will have the key you need to join that data directly to the shape files that I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to go spend a lot of time on this. I just have a few slides to kind of demystify how these files work. This is an example where I have the geoheader, a piece of the geoheader. It's a much longer table than this, but I just truncated it to fit on the screen in a visible way on the top. And then I have data segment 1, and it's a much longer file as well, but I just truncated it to fit on the screen so that for the example. But they both have a field in them called log-recno. That is a common field that identifies the record in the geoheader that matches the record in the data segment. So you bring these files into your database, you join them on that field, and then you ask your question. In this case, since this is the Rhode Island data that I mentioned, while you have those fields connected, say I want my total population for townships in Rhode Island. So you go to the technical document and you say, well, what's the geographic code or the summary level in census terms for a township? And that's 060. And then you say, well, what's the total population field? One of the total population fields is P0010001. So you know both of those things. So then you create an extract from your database that says, give me all the records where the summary level is equal to 060. And then in my output, I want to have the geocode field because I'm going to be joining this to my shapefiles. I want the name field because I want to have a nice plain English can refer to things based on the way most people refer to them. That's not actually on this table because it's part of what I cut off, but it's in that geoheader. And I want P001001. So you can see it'll pull the geocode field, the records that relate to the records that have the 060 summary level. But then it will also reach across to the data segment. It'll match up on that logical record number and say which records match the ones in my geoheader, and it'll pull the records from the PV01 field. And it returns to you a nice table in a format in which you want to see. So it does require some additional handling. It does require running it through a piece of software that allows you to make that relationship between the tables, typically a relational database. I use Microsoft Access to create the examples. It can be done in pretty much any database software, I believe, but that's sort of how all that pulls together. We have been talking to major software vendors, Caliper Corporation, ESRI, Citygate GIS, Election Data Services, Polydata. We've been talking to the staff members at the National Conference of State Legislatures and the Redistricting Elections Committee. We've been talking to the Redistricting Data Hub, which is a nonprofit that's going to process this data at the block level when it comes out. And then we've also been talking to several states individually to make sure that they understand the format. We've already published the technical documentation. It's available if people need to take a look at that. We have that prototype data that people can practice with. We created a header file. So those text files I mentioned that are in the zip file, they only have the data. They don't have the field names. So we created an Excel file that has the field names that people can use if they're building an import script. We have the Microsoft Access database shell and a how to use it guide so people can practice with that to get comfortable with the concepts. We have a SAS script for importing this into SAS, the legacy format summary file. We're working on getting an R script, so if people don't want to have to pay for a SAS license, they can work with R. So we're trying to get as many support products as we can pull together to help people. All of these that are listed on the slide are available today. And how this will roll out, on August 16th, or earlier if it's available earlier, but likely August 16th, the files will be posted to the Census Bureau's public FTP site. So it'll be a site that people will be able to go to and grab those zip files that I mentioned. That will happen by August 16th. The mailing of the DVDs and flash drives will happen before September 30th. That'll go to the official recipient list you see at the bottom here: governors, minority and majority legislative leaders, redistricting commissions if they're established, and then the nonpartisan state liaisons. Those are the people that work directly with the redistricting data program in each state. They'll get a copy of this DVD, and we'll also send the data through our web tool and make it available to the public so that anyone can also access the same data that we're providing the states. To try to make all of this easier, we have a very simple website with a vanity URL, as we call it. It's just census.gov/RDO. This is the page that you'll come to with just these 4 main links on the front. If you go to the bottom one, the Redistricting Data Program Management, that's where you can find under phase 3, which is the data delivery phase of the program. You can find the prototype data, and you can find the legacy format summary file support materials that I showed you on the other slide. When the data is finally published, we will be putting it under the Decennial Census PL 94-171 Redistricting Data Summary Files page. And as a matter of fact, we already have links to all the geography there as well. So the geography links are there. We'll post the tabulation links there once they are available. And then if you're interested in the Section 203 language determinations or the citizen voting age by population annual tabulation we do from the American Community Survey at the request of the Department of Justice, those get posted on the left-hand side under that voting rights link, which will always be there if you go to this census.gov RDO page. So with that, I would just say thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions that may have come up during that.
James, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. You covered a lot of information, and we do have a number of questions. I'd like to get the first one started off with. There have been a couple of questions about what happens with, and this is a procedural question, so if it's something that you don't really feel comfortable about, let me know, and we can track down other answers. But what happens as part of the data collection? You're talking about returning data back to local governments, but if during data collection there were incomplete responses or no responses for certain addresses, how is that data dealt with in what you're presenting back to local governments?
So I can't address this in great detail because it's not really my area of expertise, but I am familiar with it. Of course, I'm working at the Census Bureau. There's a lot of processes. So if we don't get a self-response in the census, we have an operation called non-response follow-up. And through that operation, we send people out to knock on doors and try to get a response. And there's a series of actions that occur in that process. They visit the house. If there's if they determine that the house is occupied, but they can't get a response, then they may look at administrative records. If we have strong administrative records that we feel comfortable with, we may use that to enumerate the house. If we then don't have the administrative records and we knock more times, after I think it was 3 or 4 times, we can go and get a proxy, which could be from a neighbor, it could be from a building manager. So there's a series of operations. And then at the end of all of that, if we still can't get a response or a status, the Census Bureau has a process of imputation in which it has used for decades that will allow us to impute the population that's necessary for that household. So when you get the data back, it should be a full data set without those missing values that were described in the question.
Thanks for that, James. I understand that, as you mentioned, that it's not really your usual place of operation, but just to let folks know, if from a local government standpoint, if you were tracking the response rates during the data collection part of the census, when the non-response follow-up operation started, at the end of that operation, the Census Bureau was reporting 99.9% completion. That reflects not only the response period, the self-response period, but it's that door-to-door period where the census workers were able to verify this is a vacant housing unit, or they conducted responses. interviews with people who didn't respond, or those addresses were relegated to using administrative records or imputation. So when you see that 99.9%, that's the entire effort of making sure that we have a complete response for that area. And that's what James was highlighting there. Mike, did you want to bring up the next question?
Yes, James, I think the next question that we had was why is occupancy status on the data file, and is it important for redistricting?
So in the discussions that I've had with people who actually conduct redistricting, or the folks who draw lines for a living, so for lack of a better way to describe them, it's not typically something that they pay attention to in their redistricting. But in the history of the redistricting data program, what we've always done is we've asked the states, what information do you need for conducting your work? And we had a housing table, much like what we have this decade, in 1990, and we took it away in 2000, and we got a very strong response saying, no, we want that back in 2010. So we've added it back basically because states have requested it to be there. It also serves a purpose, which will feed into, I think, Matthew's discussion later, in that it provides information that folks can look at as they're evaluating the quality of their data to see if they want to take advantage of the CQR operation. So it allows that early data to be released so people can be taking a look at that as well.
And the second question I have is another question related to what's going to be on the redistricting file is, will marital status or any sort of household information be included in the redistricting file?
No, those items are not in the redistricting file. You'll have to wait for later 2020 census products to get that information.
And there's a follow-up question about, to be clear on the timeline, so data can be expected to be released and be available by the end of September, at which time we, local governments, can begin the redistricting process. So I think we need to clarify between the preliminary data release that'll be available in August and by the end of September. So James, could you clarify what will be released when?
So the data in the legacy format summary file format will be released by August 16th, no later than August 16th. That is the redistricting data. If you so chose to use it, and you had the expertise, or you had the support of someone who had the expertise to use that format, you could begin your redistricting with that data. Otherwise, we will have the redistricting toolkit that makes the data easier to use and easier to extract available in September. That'll be our data.census.gov platform for the majority of folks on this call, I believe.
And this is a little bit of a quick follow-up, and James, I don't know if you can answer this one, but there's a Federal Register notice that just ended on proposed changes to urban area criteria, urbanized area criteria, but the redistricting release does have a flag at the census block level designating that block as being urban or rural. Is that correct?
I don't believe so. Going off of my information from my memory from the 2010 census, the urban rural designations don't get added until later. So the next product after the redistricting data is the DHC, and then they do an urban rural refresh where the urban rural flag gets added to the DHC product at the block level.
And the DHC, for listeners, is the demographic and housing characteristic file. That's what you may be familiar with as the summary file 1 from the 2010 census. And we don't have a firm date on when to expect that to be released at this time.
And I think we have one last question, James, and I think you covered it in your slides, but I just want to give you a chance to reiterate. When data are available in mid-August, will there be instructions on how to access that data and use that, or links to that information? Yeah,
we actually have practice data up on our website right now. So If people go back and reference the slides, if you go to that bottom link on that page, census.gov/RDO, and you go to the program management, there are a bunch of materials that help people are there designed to help people to understand the structure of the files, how to work with the files. And then there's a Microsoft Access database shell that you can work with the prototype data that we have posted there to familiarize yourself with how to work with that data. And then you can actually use that shell with the actual data because it's representing the same file structure that we expect to produce for the 2020 data. We'll be continuing to look to see if there's other things we can provide, but they'll all be provided, and we'll try to get them up actually before the data is released so people can familiarize themselves ahead of time.
Great. Thanks, James. Thank you. Thanks for all that information, James. I think that's it's been very helpful to folks here. I hope everybody's ready for their data to come out in mid-August. Just a reminder that so we'll have the next speaker, and you can post questions at any time. There's a button that has kind of a question mark, and you can post questions there, and Bob and I are kind of looking at those, and then we'll feed those questions to each speaker at the end. And then if there's something we didn't respond to, we'll follow up later to give you, sometimes it's information that Bob or I can provide and help, kind of focus on the expertise of these speakers. So the next speaker is Michael Hawes. He's a senior advisor for data access and privacy at the US Census Bureau. And I want to say I really appreciate Michael over the last few years to getting out there, to talking to different groups, the State Data Center Network and the state demographers, and to kind of get us up to speed on this new process in data privacy. And I think you provide at least a good overview of data privacy in this next presentation. Michael is responsible for outreach and engagement with the Census Bureau's data users on issues relating to the impact of privacy protection methodologies and on the accessibility and usability of census data. Prior to joining the Census Bureau, Michael served as the Director of Student Privacy at the U.S. Department of Education, where he was the department's senior policy official responsible for the administration and enforcement of federal laws governing the privacy and confidentiality of education records. Michael currently serves as chair of the American Statistical Association's Committee on Professional Ethics. He's also a member of the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology and chairs the FSCM's Confidentiality and Data Access Committee. Michael, you have the floor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. And let me make sure that I can share my screen here. Great. Well, as Mike and James mentioned, the Census Bureau is adopting new and improved and stronger privacy protections for the 2020 census data products. Excuse me. So today I'm going to just walk briefly through a little bit about the Census Bureau's obligations to protect privacy, as well as kind of the basics of what our new privacy protections are going to entail and what implications they may have for your use of the census data products. I just want to acknowledge briefly, particularly the contributions of our many data users and external stakeholders. Groups like the state data centers, the Federal State Cooperative on Population Estimates, and many others have been enormously helpful to us as we've gone through the design and implementation process of these new safeguards. So really big thanks to all of our data users who have been contributing to this initiative. So data stewardship, the process of protecting privacy and confidentiality in our data is absolutely central to the Census Bureau's ability to produce high quality statistics about the nation's people and economy. Our commitment to protecting the privacy of our respondents and the confidentiality of their data is a legal requirement for us under Title 13, Sections 8B and 9, which impose very strict criminal penalties on Census Bureau employees were we to disclose confidential information from the census. But more than just being a legal obligation, it's also an ethical one, and it's a core component of our institutional culture. We would not be able to collect the information from our respondents if our respondents did not trust that we would be able to properly safeguard and protect it. And so this really is a core element of our institutional culture at the Census Bureau. And when we publish our data products, we can't just think about privacy threats as they exist today, because once we've published the data, they're out there. So we also have to ensure that the statistical methods that we use to safeguard the data, our disclosure avoidance processes, are going to be sufficient to protect against privacy threats that might emerge tomorrow. Over the past century, the Census Bureau has been a world leader in the research, design, and implementation of statistical methods to safeguard privacy in public data releases. And over the years, as new privacy threats have been identified, Census Bureau researchers and practitioners have been working diligently to improve our own statistical safeguards to be able to counter and mitigate those threats. Our adoption of differential privacy as our new approach to privacy protection for the 2020 census is merely the latest in what has been a long history of innovation and continuous improvement to our privacy protections. And it's a necessary one given kind of new changes that have occurred in the privacy landscape over the last several years. The challenge we face is that we collect and release vast quantities of information in our data products. Information tabulated from the decennial census is used for a wide array of purposes. They're used to apportion seats in the House of Representatives, to draw district boundaries for federal, state, and local elections, and to distribute over $675 billion in federal funding each year. But they're also used, as all of you know, for critical decision-making at all levels of government, and they enable policymakers, businesses, analysts, and researchers across the country to really measure and assess trends about who we are and where we're going as a society. But in order to support these myriad and diverse uses of census data, we have to publish enormous amounts of statistics and data tables, often at very fine levels of geographic detail and characteristic granularity. Unfortunately, we know that every time you publish any statistic that's calculated from a confidential data source, you're going to reveal or leak a tiny bit of private information in the process. And so if you release too many statistics at too high a degree of accuracy with too much detail, you're eventually going to reveal the entire underlying confidential data source from which you calculated those statistics. And this challenge becomes even greater when you consider some recent trends that make privacy threats all the more concerning. There's been a massive proliferation over the last couple decades of external data about each and every one of us. Data collected by the businesses we interact with, posted on social media, and much more. And parallel to this proliferation of third-party data, there's been tremendous advances in computing technology, both in terms of computing power, but also in terms of the development of very sophisticated computer algorithms that can leverage all of that rich third-party information about us and use it in an attempt to re-identify or pick out specific individuals in the data that the Census Bureau publishes from the census. And these parallel trends of more third-party data and increasingly powerful computers and algorithms represent real threats to our ability to safeguard our respondents' information. So based on these new challenges, the Census Bureau recognized that the traditional disclosure avoidance methods that we had been using in past decades to protect respondent confidentiality were growing increasingly insufficient to counter these new vectors of attack. So to meet our continuing obligations to safeguard respondent information, we realized that we had to modernize our approach to privacy protections. And this brings us to our adoption of differential privacy for the 2020 census. But to understand a bit more about the advantages that differential privacy brings to our efforts to safeguard respondent information, it's helpful to understand how disclosure avoidance works in the first place. So writ large, disclosure avoidance prevents re-identification of specific individuals in published data by attempting to either reduce the precision of the data, by removing vulnerable records, vulnerable data points from the data you're publishing, or by introducing uncertainty. And commonly used traditional methods for accomplishing this have been things like complementary suppression of individual cells or tables in the data that you're publishing, rounding of values in the data, recoding extreme values at the top or bottom ends of the distribution, sampling from a larger population, swapping records within the data like we did for the 2000 and 2010 censuses, or other forms of injecting noise, uncertainty, or error into the data. The challenge here and the problem that you face is that any statistical technique that you can use to protect privacy is going to impose a fundamental trade-off between the degree of privacy protection on the one hand and the resulting accuracy of the data on the other. And this isn't just a byproduct of the process. This impact on the accuracy is precisely how you are able to afford privacy protection in the first place. And where on this spectrum of privacy protection at the one extreme to accuracy of the data at the other, where in between those two extremes you fall is going to be determined by the parameters of the disclosure avoidance method that you select. So parameters like the record swapping rates or noise injection parameters, self-suppression thresholds, and so on are what determine where on the spectrum of perfect privacy with useless data or at one extreme to perfect data with no privacy protection at the other. These parameters determine where between those two extremes you're going to fall. The problem with historic disclosure avoidance methods like those used in past decades is they provide little ability to really quantify privacy risk or privacy protection. They're much more subjective in nature. So consequently, when faced with increasing threats to privacy, increasing risks, disclosure avoidance practitioners would have to kind of make subjective assessments about what increases or in the implementation parameters would be necessary to counter those threats. But again, because traditional approaches to privacy protection were largely subjective in nature, they also offered only scattershot solutions to this challenge. And what that meant was that when you're increasing your parameters to better protect the data, you often end up overprotecting some records or some data elements while underprotecting your more vulnerable data subjects. And this poses a real challenge. Which brings us to differential privacy. Differential privacy, unlike some of the other disclosure avoidance methods that I mentioned before, like swapping or noise injection or suppression, differential privacy isn't really a disclosure avoidance technique in the same way. Rather, it's an accounting framework for defining and quantifying privacy risk and, by extension, the privacy protection that you're affording to the data. It's really a privacy accounting mechanism that you then combine with other disclosure avoidance techniques. We know that every individual that's reflected in any particular statistic is going to contribute towards that statistic's value. And I mentioned before that every statistic that you publish is going to leak a tiny bit of private information or confidential information in the process. The privacy accounting framework of differential privacy allows us to assess each and every individual's contribution to each of the statistics that we publish, and then measure, and therefore you're able to limit how much information about each individual can leak in any statistic that you're releasing publicly. So when you combine the the differentially private kind of privacy accounting framework with a disclosure avoidance technique like noise injection, where you're injecting statistical noise or error into the data that you're publishing. Differential privacy allows you to precisely control and limit the amount of private information leakage that's going to occur in your published statistics. Now, this approach offers a number of really substantial advantages over traditional approaches to privacy protection. For starters, it's infinitely tunable. How you inject that noise is accomplished through a vast array of parameters, or you can think of them as dials, that can be set anywhere on that spectrum from perfect privacy to perfect accuracy. More importantly, in an era of heightened privacy threats, the privacy guarantee that this privacy risk accounting framework offers is mathematically provable, and it's future-proof. So we don't have to worry about how the privacy landscape might change or evolve next week, next year, or next decade. And also important, the calibration, the precise calibration of the statistical noise that you're injecting into the data can kind of provably provide more optimal data accuracy for any particular level of privacy protection that you're going to impose. Now, I mentioned before that this trade-off between privacy and accuracy is really a spectrum. The only way you could absolutely eliminate any risk of re-identification of census respondents in the published data would be to never release any usable data at all. And clearly, as the nation's leading provider of quality statistics about the country, not releasing data just isn't an option for us. So instead, we have to find the optimal balance wherein we're providing data that are sufficiently accurate for their intended uses, while also being sufficiently noisy, sufficiently injected with uncertainty to meet our legal and ethical obligations to safeguard the data. And finding this balance is a difficult policy choice, but it is a policy decision about how accurate is accurate enough and how protected is protected enough. But once you've done that, once you've identified that point on the spectrum where the data are sufficiently accurate and sufficiently protected against privacy threats, you can represent that through the differential privacy accounting framework as your privacy loss budget. And you'll often see this represented as either the acronym PLB or the Greek letter epsilon. And much like a monetary budget, the lower your privacy loss budget, the less privacy you're willing to give up in return for accuracy. An epsilon of 0 would be the world of perfect privacy with completely useless data. And an epsilon of infinity would be the world of perfect data with no privacy protections. Ultimately, we need to find a point between those two extremes, as I mentioned, where the data are sufficiently accurate to meet your needs while also being sufficiently protected to protect your privacy. So what does all this mean for the 2020 census? Well, I want to be very clear that our modernization of privacy protections using this differential privacy framework does not change the constitutional mandate to apportion seats in the House of Representatives using the actual enumeration of state populations. So the apportionment data that we released back in April were the exact enumerated counts. There was no noise injected into those totals. The remaining data products for the 2020 census, however, including the Public Law 94-171 redistricting data summary file, will have privacy protections applied to them as they have in prior censuses. It's just this time around, the noise that we're going to be injecting into the data is going to come from our differentially private algorithms rather than from the record swapping mechanisms that we used for past censuses. Now, the switch to differential privacy does also require us to change the formats and coverage of some of our data products. So the data products that we'll be releasing for the 2020 census will look slightly different than they have in past decades. And if you want to learn more about what those changes are going to look like, you can go to the census.gov website and just search 2020 census data products, and you'll get some useful information on what those differences are going to entail. Now, since October of 2019, the Census Bureau has been periodically releasing some demonstration data products using 2010 census data that we've run through various iterations of our differentially private algorithms. And we've been releasing these demonstration data to enable our data users to evaluate what the impact of differential privacy might have on their use of census data, and to provide input that will help us to better improve and ensure the fitness for use of the resulting data. The first 4 sets of demonstration data that we released in October of 2019 and then May, September, and November of 2020 used a global privacy loss budget that was on the conservative end, so geared more towards the privacy protection and less towards accuracy. And we kept the privacy loss budget constant across those 4 demonstration data sets in order to allow our data users to evaluate improvements that we've made to the algorithms that we're using, rather than improvements in accuracy due to a higher privacy loss budget geared more towards accuracy. The actual 2020 census data products are not going to be held to this fixed privacy loss budget. In fact, on April 28th of this year, we released a 5th set of demonstration data that was using a global privacy loss budget that was much higher than those from the prior demonstration data products. And we believe that this higher level of privacy loss budget more closely approximates the level that will actually be selected for the 2020 census redistricting data file. Then later this year, after we have produced the 2020 census redistricting data file, we'll release a final set of demonstration data using the 2010 census, run through the algorithm with all of the exact parameters and settings and privacy loss budget that were used to produce the actual 2020 redistricting data. We'll be releasing that demonstration data again in September in order to enable our data users to evaluate the anticipated actual accuracy and fitness for use of the 2020 redistricting data product. Now, if you would like to evaluate those demonstration data, they're posted on our website and through the links here. You can submit feedback to us to inform the final decision making on privacy loss budget and system parameters. That feedback is due very soon. It's due on the 28th of this month, and you can send comments to our dedicated website at 2020-DAS@census.gov. In particular, if you're interested in doing your own evaluations, we'd be eager to get feedback on fitness for use criteria. Do these data meet your needs, or would incremental improvements be necessary? And if so, by how much? Do these particular parameters raise any privacy concerns for you or those in your communities? And if there's improvements over prior sets of demonstration data that you'd like us to ensure that we retain for the final actual production versions, identify those as well so we know what not to tweak when we make our final decisions. And if you want to stay informed of our work to modernize privacy protections, you can sign up to our newsletter. Just go to census.gov and search disclosure avoidance, where we post new newsletter topics every week or two with the latest updates on our modernization initiative. And if you want to learn more information about our adoption of differentially private algorithms for the 2020 census, again, just check out our website, just search disclosure avoidance at census.gov. We've got frequently asked questions, white papers, blogs, some videos, and lots more really useful information to help you better understand why we're making these changes and what those changes may imply for your use of census data. And with that, I'm happy to take some questions.
Great, Michael. I first wanted to, I really want to thank you for providing an overview. And I know many folks out listening to this may be your first introduction to the processes that we're talking about, differential privacy and disclosure avoidance. There's a lot of technical things that go on in any census, and as Michael stated, we've done different things to protect privacy and confidentiality in years past. So this isn't anything new in terms of protecting privacy. It is a whole new system and way of doing things, which will impact the data that are provided to you and what they may look like. And that's why Bob and I wanted to introduce that to you. And I know there may be a lot of technical information and it may be kind of overwhelming. So this is just kind of an introduction. I'm going to post a link to our website here shortly, our webpage on our website that does provide information on census-related issues, redistricting, CQR, and differential privacy. And in fact, Michael talked about the demonstration products, and we've done a quick summary for our North Carolina places and counties and other geographies, so you can take a look at it there. I'll start out with a question, Michael. Let's see. Kind of looking at those demonstration products, and James talked about redistricting and having occupied housing and housing information. Looking at those block level data, there seems to be a disconnect between population and housing. Is there a possibility that the redistricting data will not include population and housing at the block level?
So and James could actually speak more authoritatively on what's in the redistricting file, but no, the specifications for the redistricting file have been finalized for quite a while. So the tables that James walked through of what's included will be included in the actual production run of the 2020 redistricting data. The part of your question about some of the inconsistencies that you've been seeing between the population totals and the occupied housing totals, those have been brought to our attention. Some of that for this data product is going to be just kind of inherent to the privacy protection mechanism. The need to provide block level location protection, which is where the privacy vulnerabilities are greatest, does require that there be some kind of disassociation between those two sets of tabulations. But then there will be additional housing data supplied later on in the 2020 data products that will provide much greater kind of what we call person household joins, where household structure is tabulated in different ways. And so those will resolve many of those inconsistencies that have been identified in the PL data.
Great, thank you for that, Michael. Just looking at a few other questions that have come in regarding privacy, and I know there's been some controversy over the decision to convert the ACS data to fully synthetic for privacy concerns. And I just got published, excuse me, I'm fine again. Regarding privacy, I know there has been some controversy over the decision to convert the ACS data to fully synthetic for privacy concerns. What steps are the Census Bureau taking to ensure the ACS data remain useful for data researchers who need the microdata? And I think this is also kind of a larger question of, is differential privacy something that's only being applied to decennial, or is it being applied to all census data?
So great questions, and we've been getting this a lot over the last week. There was a slight misunderstanding when the presentation about the ACS was made by one of my colleagues last week. Regarding the research we've been conducting into the use of synthetic data for the ACS. I want to be very clear. No final decisions have been made about how the privacy protections for the ACS are going to be changed. The investigation into synthetic data is still in the research stage, and we have not made any decisions to that effect. What we have decided is the Census Bureau, recognizing the growing privacy threats out there, we have decided that we have to modernize the privacy protections for all of our censuses and surveys, and that includes the ACS. It also includes the economic census and many of the other data products that you all are familiar with. That modernization of privacy protections for all of these different censuses and surveys is an ongoing process and will take many years to accomplish. We have previously stated that no we're not going to be transitioning the American Community Survey to modernized privacy protections until 2025 at the earliest, and that will only occur after extensive stakeholder engagement, where we work with our data users to ensure that we understand what their needs are with regards to ACS data, and ensure that we can design a privacy protection methodology, whether it's synthetic data or whether it is another modernized privacy protection approach, that we can ensure that we're designing a system that meets our data users' needs while also effectively protecting against the emerging privacy threats of today.
Great. Michael, here's another good one. It's talking about voting tabulation districts. Question is, I've heard that disclosure avoidance is optimized differently in different states based on, for example, whether you rely on voting tabulation districts or tracks more in redistricting. Can you say if North Carolina's differential privacy algorithms will be optimized to VTDs as a layer in the hierarchy or something else?
Okay, so we're getting into some of the more technical aspects of how the top-down algorithm, which is at the heart of our 2020 disclosure avoidance system, actually operates. And I could spend an entire hour just going into the mechanics of this, but to try to answer your question simply and quickly, the top-down algorithm does conduct an extensive series of post-processing steps down a geographic hierarchy that begins at the nation and moves its way down nation to state to tract to block group to block. To state to county to tract to block group to block. We have made some optimizations in that post-processing to improve accuracy for legal and political entities that fall off of that geographic hierarchy. So townships, boroughs, incorporated places, census designated places, and so on. The optimizations that we were doing to improve the accuracy for those off-spine, off the hierarchy legal and political entities, we use different sets of geographic entities in different types of states to meet that. And the big difference, so this was informed by experts in our geography division as to which legal and political geographies we should be optimizing towards. Those largely tracked with political organization within states. So big division between what are called strong minor civil division states and weak minor civil division states. In the strong MCD states, we were optimizing to bring those minor civil divisions closer to that tabulation hierarchy. In the non-strong MCD states, the weak MCD states, we were targeting towards places, so summary level 160 geographic entities, which are, as I mentioned, incorporated places and census designated places. So I don't know off the top of my head whether North Carolina is a strong MCD state or not, so I can't say which set were used for North Carolina, even though I lived there for 4 years. But depending on whether you're a strong MCD state or not, that was the distinction made during that optimization. But I do want to be very clear, that optimization does not impact how the data will be tabulated. All of the data products will be tabulating using the traditional tabulation geographies.
Great. And just for the record, we are a weak MCD state. So there was a brief comment here that I agree with the concern in the distortion as community planning organizations and others try to use this data to apply for grants and utilize and identify vulnerable areas. So just an application concern that I'll mention. There is a question of when will decisions about differential privacy be finalized? I assume this is a question about what the final budget decisions will be for privacy laws.
So the final decisions for the data products are going to be occurring on a rolling basis. In early June, our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee will be making the final decisions on privacy loss budget allocation for the PL 94-171 redistricting data product, because that is the first of the privacy protected data products that will be produced. Subsequent decisions will have to be made about privacy loss budget for the demographic and housing characteristics files, and then the detailed demographic and housing characteristics files that'll be released after that. In early June, we'll be making the first of those decisions for the redistricting product. Subsequent decisions will still need to be made, but those will occur after demonstration data have been produced for the DHC and after stakeholder engagement has occurred to inform those decisions. So the decision that's coming up is just for the PL file. There will be more decision making for the subsequent data files at a later time.
I think we have one additional question, and I think the question is why is marital status? Why does it improve accuracy? And I think what the question is, why is that a risk for disclosing individual information, that more household characteristics information?
So I'm not sure I entirely understand the question.
I think it goes back to that household structure information.
Oh, okay.
And they're waiting for, yeah.
So kind of writ large, the more characteristics that you produce at lower levels of geography, the greater the privacy risk, because it's more pieces of information that an attacker who wants to re-identify individuals can use to piece together the identities of the respondents. So detailed block level information poses the greatest privacy threat. And so that's where any privacy protection methodology is going to have to be focused. Like, for example, I mean, even in past censuses with the data swapping mechanism that we used, we were looking at individuals who were vulnerable at the block level and individuals who had unique combinations of characteristics at the block level and targeted the swapping mechanism particularly at them. In the context of our differentially private algorithms, there is substantial focus on how do you ensure adequate protection when we're producing so much detailed information at such low levels of geography, and certainly household structure poses one area where there is substantial privacy risk, and that's something that we have to address.
Thank you, Michael, for really a very in-depth, a very meaty presentation. As we move on, I want to take a quick step back just to let folks know what we've heard so far. So as James told us, we've had state level information from the 2020 census already released, but for tribal, municipal, and county governments, we'll be seeing data that's available in the middle of August through the redistricting interim release, and then there'll be a more complete release through data.census.gov by the end of September. So that will be your first opportunity to see your population data for your sub-state areas. What we've just heard is that the Census Bureau commitment to confidentiality means that some of the data tables we're used to seeing may not initially be there, and we're going to have to wait to see what the demographic and housing characteristics file, which we don't have a release date for that yet. There's going to have to be some decisions that are made on how that data gets released, and some of those decisions have not been made yet. However, what we do know with the differential privacy discussion is that at the sub-state level, state populations are held invariant, but below the state level, the privacy loss budget can be applied and is applied to population tables. At the block level, the housing unit and group quarters by type is invariant. So as we start looking at your municipal, your county, your tribal area populations, understand that the privacy loss budget is applied to that. So with that being said, we move into to Matthew Freight's presentation on what if you see your data and you have some concerns. What is the process like? Do you have any recourse to challenge the census counts? So Matthew is a program analyst with the Census Bureau, serving as a program lead for the Census 2020 address canvassing operation. With 14 years of experience with the Census Bureau, Matthew has experience on initiatives to streamline and improve data collection and assure data quality. So with that, I will hand the mic to Matthew Freight and let you take it away.
Thank you, Bob. Can everybody hear me out there? That was a wonderful introduction. Actually, I will say that my current job is the branch chief of the CQR branch in Decennial Management Division. However, I did work on address canvassing from 2016 through its completion in 2019. So hopefully that work experience lends itself to this job. So as Bob said, my name is Matt Freitz, branch chief for the CQR branch here in DCMD at Census. And I'm kind of going to present to you a little bit of an overview and get into a little bit of the detail about CQR. And I just want to say out front, many of the questions that I receive as part of these presentations is, will my particular situation be in scope for CQR? And I want to set the expectations very early on. Those are almost impossible to answer at this time because we need to have all the information from a jurisdiction as well as what we have on hand, and we just we don't have the ability to answer that right now. So if that is a question that you have, it will be better served for when CQR is opening its doors. So the first slide we're going to go through is just a little bit of an overview. This is really what I'd like to call the 30,000-foot view. The CQR operation accepts requests for review of the 2020 census housing and population counts, and we base those on two types of cases, and those are boundary and living quarters count cases, and I will get into those in more depth on the next slide. Count corrections will be issued when necessary to the tribal chairperson or the highest elected official of those affected governmental units, and we will upload those corrections to our CQR website, and those will be as a RADA. Any corrections that are made as part of the CQR process will be reflected in the future population estimates programs that take place at the Census Bureau. CQR will not be revising the apportionment data sent to the Office of the President, which has already happened, and we will not be revising the redistricting data that's sent to the states a little bit later this year, nor will we be revising the demographics and housing characteristics file. CQR does not collect any new data in the field, and it is not the same as a special census. It is also not a mechanism to address data concerns that are due to any disclosure avoidance methods applied by the Census Bureau, and some of those Michael talked about a little bit earlier. The operation itself, we limit our scope to what I call 3 geographic scenarios within the 2 case types that I mentioned. And the reason for that is because there are great logistical challenges to any type of a re-enumeration effort in a particular area. And also, along the entirety of the census cycle, the census employs robust quality assurance processes to assure that every household and person is accounted for along the way. And I mentioned the special census program earlier and how CQR is not that, but that is really the avenue where a larger enumeration undertaking would, take place. So I mentioned that there were 3 geographic scenarios or 3 scenarios within the 2 case types that I mentioned. And within the what we call a living quarter count case, there are 2 distinct scenarios, a geocoding correction and a coverage correction. A geocoding correction would be when the Census Bureau is reviewing the geographic location of a living quarters within like a specified 2020 census tabulation block. And so in the visual representation here on the left is where the census had it as at the time of April 1st. And then when a CQR case is put in and we do our research, you're looking to see that, it's really not supposed to be there. These houses were geocoded in the wrong place, and so an adjustment is made. For a coverage example would be if, due to some type of an error, processing error, these housing units were completely missed. So in the example on the left-hand side in that scenario, those housing units are not there, and then when we do our research, we see that they should have been there, and we will put them back and make adjustments as necessary. The other type of case would be a boundary case, and this would be where the Census Bureau is reviewing the legal governmental boundaries in effect as of January 1st, and also the associated living quarters affected by this boundary. So in this particular case, on the left, we see where the boundary is, where the Census Bureau had it, and then through research, we find that it should be in that nice little jagged pattern there. And because we have adjusted that boundary, we are now including the housing units that should have been in there based off of the correct boundary. So the workflow, like what happens during CQR once we start accepting cases? The tribal, state, and local governments will review their published 2020 census results, and if they suspect any type of errors with either their boundaries or their housing counts by block, they may file a CQR case. Once we receive these cases, CQR staff will review the case materials for correctness and completeness, and we will determine whether the case is in or out of scope based off of the criteria set forth. In-scope cases are then sent to our geographic subject matter experts, and they will research to possibly have some type of a resolution. During that research, staff will review the 2020 census enumeration and processing records in conjunction with any evidence that is supplied with the CQR case by the governmental unit. and research may or may not find what we call processing errors in the 2020 census data. If no processing errors are found, there will be no updates and the case will be considered closed. If any processing errors were found, they are addressed within the Census Bureau's records and systems, and any corrections that need to be made will be made as necessary. The Census Bureau will then provide a disposition for each CQR case to that highest elected official of all the impacted tribal, state, and local governments via a determination letter. We will post any revised housing and population counts for affected census blocks as errata, as I mentioned before. Once a case is officially received, we log it into our systems. The government is then notified, and the Census Bureau, we give ourselves a 90-day window to bring a case to completion. I do want to say that our ability to turn those cases around within 90 days obviously could be impacted by the number of cases that we receive within a given time frame. But regardless, the Census Bureau will maintain a line of communication if that were to be the case, if we're not able to make that. An example would be if we open our doors for case submission and we receive a ton of cases all at once, which isn't out of the realm of possibility. We may not necessarily be able to meet that 90-day time frame, but we will be communicating that to you as we know it. Cases that are deemed out of scope will still require communication from the census, so you will receive some type of a notification from us, a formal notification to let you know of that outcome. And the census staff may contact you during the course of their research. So reasons for that might include clarifying the scope of the case that you're asking for, identifying problems with some of the supporting materials we received, as along with your inquiry and some others. So there will be open lines of communication once a case is received. So fundamentally speaking, CQR really hasn't changed a whole lot from 2010 to 2020. Some of the differences that we have noted here is that for those living quarter cases, we found that the requirement of an address list for those cases did not necessarily benefit the research phase that was going into the solution for those particular scenarios. So we are no longer requiring that anymore. We are, however, requiring that for a boundary change. This change in requirements is really to make it more straightforward for the participants, because what we found was that most jurisdictions knew there was some type of account discrepancy, but they didn't necessarily know whether it was coverage or geocoding or exactly where that was taking place. They just knew that the numbers didn't look right. So we're making it more straightforward so that the Census Bureau can do the research on our end and sort of make it more of facilitate the process for our participants. And we kind of looked through the implementation of the 2010 CQR, and we just realized that address list wasn't beneficial for either party, and we don't require it anymore, which should make it easier. I do want to note too, and this comes up a lot, these days, about what kind of an impact CQR can have. So in 2010, the total amount of in-scope cases that we received was 443, and of those 443, 119 resulted in some type of account change. It's also to note that the number of reinstated housing units or added housing units in total was 175. So even though the CQR process exists to ask to look into the census data, the scope of it is limited and therefore doesn't have as much of an impact as it might come out. And we wanted to highlight that here because we have received a lot of questions about the scope and the expectations of the program thus far, which actually is a perfect segue into this slide. So back at the end of last year, during our OMB clearance process, we submitted our Federal Register notice, which some of you might have seen. And during that 60-day comment period, which ended in October, we received quite a bit of feedback from our stakeholders regarding the scope and also the start date of the CQR operation. We're planning now to revise the start date again. So in the original plans, if everything had gone the way it was supposed to for the 2020 census, the CQR operation would have started accepting cases June 1st. Because of the delays that took place from the 2020 census, we decided to adjust our start date to give a little bit more time for possible delays that could have happened. So the start date was also now supposed to be October 1st. And since we received this feedback and we've been considering it, we have now decided to move it to January of 2022. We will still continue accepting cases through June 30th of 2023, and all of our dispositions for these cases have to be completed no later than September 30th of 2023. Those milestones were changed during the COVID revisions, and those remain in place. So there will be an 18-month window for cases to be submitted, and then that 90-day period after the end of case submission ends, we will still have to turn those around by that time. The Census Bureau is also exploring options and feasibility around how local governments may submit information during the CQR timeframe that may inform the population's program estimate base. So something that's not necessarily a part of CQR, but as CQR is going on, if it's out of scope, we are looking in to see if there's feasibility around being able to inform outside of this particular operation. In the event Census decides to expand the scope of what we consider acceptable changes or in-scope changes now, we will be putting that information within our Federal Register notice that we are hoping to issue by the fall of 2021 so that we can receive OMB clearance for January of 2022. And that's really like the biggest news coming out of all the feedback that we received. So we kind of wanted to say we hear you and we're looking into it based off of what we can do from a resources standpoint. Some key dates, and again, these have shifted over the time that I've been doing the branch chief job here. But again, I mentioned many of them in the previous slide. But one other benefit, I think, to moving the start of CQR to January of 2022 is now allowing for a lot more time for local governments to look at the data coming out as a part of redistricting. We were going to keep the start date as of, for 10/1, and obviously the data was going to be released completed in September of 2021, and there was a lot of concern over whether there'd be enough time before the operation started. However, now we're moving it back for these feasibility studies, but also now we're giving governments enough time to look at their data. We are hoping to post that Federal Register notice for the 30-day comment period in the fall, hopefully in the early fall. And now, in December of 2021 is when we are planning our proposed, what we're calling like a mass communication, which we're sending out a message to all tribal chairpersons and highest elected officials who are eligible for CQR to basically announce the program and also give like a flyer with a lot of information on how to participate in the program, communication avenues, and so forth. And that date is really when we are going to be open for business as it relates to communications. And there will be about a month time between that initial email or initial communication and the January start date. So if any questions need to be had, we will have our resources available to answer those questions prior to CQR starting. And as I reported on the last slide, the June 30th date and the September 30th date remain unchanged, where we will stop accepting cases, and then for our deadline to provide results back to the impacted governmental units. So where are we now? Well, obviously, we are continuing the planning and implementation of this operation. The management is finalizing responses to the comments we received. Obviously, receiving so many comments, we had a lot of things to consider. So it's taken considerable time to consider, the feedback we received and also put together the responses to those feedback as a part of the OMB clearance process. And again, I mentioned we want to have that done by the fall. We're also looking into, any documentation that goes into that OMB clearance. So documents that are going to be used as resources during the operation and so forth. And that's where that final bullet comes in, is we are working to finalize things like public FAQs, participant guides that governments and participants can use to help facilitate their, their participating in CQR, for lack of a better word. The flyer, which I mentioned, is going to go out with an initial communication, sort of, one pager laying out facts about the operation and so forth. The letters, and we have many different types of letters depending on the case completion, case outcome, and so forth. And then our website, which is not only where there's going to be a lot of information such as all of these documents, and we are going to be posting our completed data as errata as the operation goes on, and so forth. So that is a short but somewhat hopefully informative presentation on CQR. Again, I want to say that if there are questions about your particular scenario, it's almost impossible to answer those, and I don't want to set expectations by saying, yeah, that would be, or no, that wouldn't be, because we just don't know until we get the documentation in on both sides. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time, and I am open to questions.
Matthew, thank you for your presentation on what has been a very popular question in our office in recent weeks and months. So I do want to be clear to folks that we're talking about the Count Question Resolution Program, which is separate from the special census operation. So the Count Question Resolution Program is a free limited challenge to the decennial counts, whereas the special census is a for-cost operation that the local governments are paying for to essentially redo part of their census operation. So with that in mind, Matt, I was wondering if you could give us, for the local folks who are online looking ahead toward December, and understanding now that differential privacy could inject some noise to their population counts. So really, if they're preparing for a CQR challenge, they need to be looking at their housing unit information. If they're looking at their local housing unit resources, you're really interested in looking at the number of housing units that were in place as of April 1st, 2020, or is there a certain timeline that you're looking at to verify the presence of these housing units and municipal boundaries?
So the municipal boundaries is as of January 1st of 2020, whereas the like housing units is obviously the same as the census. The census in general is looking at where people are and where housing units are located as of April 1st. So that is where CQR is looking at it to, in terms of a challenge or a case inquiry, if you want to call it. That's really those are the two dates. So I specify the boundary one because there is a different time date for that, and it's a little bit earlier in the 2020 calendar year of 2020, whereas everything else related to where housing units are and the counts within those, if we make adjustments, is as of April 1st.
So the documentation that the local governments and tribal governments need to have is looking at April 1st. Do they need to have any information about occupancy status?
So that's all going to be coming out in what they need. Like we still haven't finalized every single piece of criteria that is going to be out there in terms of what they can provide. But what I will say is this: if a government or the designated official gets in touch with us for a case and we feel as if we're missing information, we will make that contact to say, hey, do you have this? Do you have that? We received this. We don't have all the information necessary to make a determination, and we will make sure that that line of communication is open. So I would say at this point, before we have given out all the information as to what to provide, which will be in that initial email or that initial communication, that's where they're going to get that information. And right now we haven't finalized all of that.
And Matt, and that kind of related to that initial communication, I have actually two questions related to that. One is so that letter going out in December is going out to the highest elected officials. And there's a question whether that could be copied to city attorneys as well, or somebody else in that office. And then related to that, when they do a challenge, does that need to be from the mayor, or is the city council resolution able to start a CQR case?
So when we send the initial email out, we have a database for all of the governmental units that we're planning to communicate with. It's something that we have for other geographic programs as well. So once that goes out, can it be shared? I would say the answer is yes. The highest elected official can also designate somebody to be their sort of liaison, or the person that is getting in touch with the Census Bureau, acting in their capacity, so to speak. So if they want to share that with, if the highest elected official wants to share that with whomever and designate that officially, we would just need that on like official, letterhead or something like that to say this is who we're participating with. So I think it's not necessarily going to go to more people than just what we have in our database, but it can be shared, and anybody can be deemed a like a representative for the highest elected official if they deem that appropriate. I think that answered both questions.
There is a follow-up question about municipal boundaries. So are municipal boundary annexation changes prior to April 1st, 2020 accepted by the Census Bureau? This may be more of a boundary annexation survey question, but can you provide any insight on that?
I actually am not an expert on the boundary and annexation survey, so I would probably be better served having somebody with more knowledge of that. We are sort of tangentially related to it, but we are not experts on it, and we don't work with them in terms of planning and so forth. So if that question can be archived, I can certainly attempt to get the answer for them as it relates to BAS and CQR.
That's great.
Matt,
go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe I can ask it in a different way and maybe you can answer. Because my understanding, the Census Bureau, the census boundaries are as of January 1st, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a city has an annexation between January 1st through April 1st in that window, and it sounded like earlier you stated about there's different information that you need. So is that part of that challenge process, those annexations, or they would not be counted because it's not as of January 1st?
Right. And I mean, it also has to do with, when we're cutting data for certain operations, enumeration operations and so forth, like there's internal sort of deadlines as to when some of those things take place. And again, I don't know enough about if there's an annexation between January 1st and April 1st, how that is incorporated into the census in terms of like the address list and and so forth. So I really can't answer that from my seat as the CQR branch chief. I would have to reach out to more geographically specialized folks who do that for a living. I'm more of a project manager, so to speak.
Right. We'll follow up with that.
Sure.
Yeah,
I'm happy to get the answer too.
And just as since we're talking about it, and just to inform any folks who may not be aware of the boundary annexation survey, the Census Bureau does conduct an annual survey to all state, county, municipal, tribal governments every year to track boundary changes. It usually happens toward the end of the calendar year, and the deadline, if you respond by the end of March with any boundary changes that legally went into effect as of January 1st, they show up in that year's population estimates and American Community Survey data products for that year. Obviously, things are that time period is even more important for decennial census counts, which is what we're talking about now. You can submit your boundary changes after that time period, but they won't show up until the following year's boundary annexation survey. So that's why it's important to make sure you're reporting those boundary changes. It's also important to take a look and make sure that the boundaries that the Census Bureau has for your geography are actually the boundaries that you recognize. So even if you haven't had a boundary change, it's worthwhile to take a look at that information. All right, we will give a few more moments for any other questions to come in. I would like to point out that we've had a couple of questions about recent Federal Register notices, and Matt mentioned a potential Federal Register notice coming out later this year about any changes to CQR deadlines or operations. There was a Federal Register notice that came out earlier this year, or that closed earlier this year, on proposed changes to metropolitan statistical area boundaries. That's part of a regular review that is done every 10 years by the Office of Management and Budget, not the Census Bureau, about proposed criteria changes. And our office, the Office of State Budget and Management, did respond to that proposed criteria change. There has not been a final resolution to that yet. I think the biggest thing that most folks recognize is there was a proposed change of moving the metro threshold from 50,000 to 100,000. That has not officially happened yet, but that was one of the proposed changes. Just last week, a Federal Register notice on proposed changes to urban area criteria changed. That was a Census Bureau Federal Register notice, and that is also part of a usual every 10-year review and recommendation process. Some of the changes that were in that Federal Register notice were related to confidentiality changes at the Bureau. But again, the Office of State Budget and Management made our comments as well. So some of those are outside the scope of our census friends who are on the line today, but I did want to recognize that we did see your comments, and that's why things are a little bit off scope.
There's a question about the estimates challenge in CQR, and I'll respond to this, and then I'll let Matt add anything. But as many folks have known and realized, even just in this call, there's a lot of things going on in the Census Bureau. There's a lot of different surveys, a lot of different programs. It's just not every 10 years. So there's a lot of activities that are related to each decennial census. In fact, we've already had meetings on the 2030 census. And so there's a lot of activities going on. There are annual population estimates that are produced by the Census Bureau, as well as my office. We work very closely on I provide some data to the Census Bureau and work really closely with those folks. The CQR is really where you want to make sure you get things correct. So if you find errors in the 2020 data for some different ways, you want to make sure that's corrected for 2020. And yes, those do feed into my estimates. They'll be corrected on my estimates, as well as the base for the population estimates branch. And just to give you an idea, there were 12 corrections in 2010. There were 2 counties and 10 municipalities that had some sort of corrections. Some of those were group quarters being located outside of a boundary or inside of a boundary of municipalities. So changes happen, and those are corrected there. There is also a population estimates challenge process through the Census Bureau, and that's a whole different process, and that really deals with the annual estimates, and so there may be some data input issues or something like that. And it's a whole different process, and we can talk, hopefully in a future program, we can provide that information. But as always, if you have questions about the Census Bureau processes, estimates, anything, you can talk to Bob or myself, and we're always happy to champion you within the Census Bureau, and we can kind of take Census Bureau speak and bring it to North Carolina. So I don't know if you want to add anything, Matt.
No, I mentioned it, I think, on my second slide, but the CQR results are one factor that goes into those population estimates. So I guess the brief answer is yes, but it's one of a few factors that go into it. It's not the sole factor, but they are taken into consideration.
I don't think we have any other questions. So first want to thank our speakers today from the Census Bureau. And want to thank you for your time. I know you've got a very busy time and you're covering the nation as a whole. So I really appreciate you stopping by and kind of talking to local municipalities and counties and other folks interested in the census in North Carolina. So thank you, Matt, Michael, and James, for your very informative sessions. And I also want to thank everybody that's come to the session today to maybe get your first peek into what's going to be coming in August and later. So appreciate you taking the time. We know you've got a very busy schedules, and we hope that we've been able to meet your needs today. We are planning on having other virtual sessions, and we will, after this event, the next couple of days, look for an email asking for your evaluation of this meeting, as well as your ideas on what you would like to see in future meetings regarding census or some other demographic information in any sort of future virtual sessions. I also want to thank staff at the OSBM, Marcia Evans, for coordinating and promoting this virtual event. And I want to thank Carol Maloney and Paula Jones and Marcia for providing technical assistance in the background and making sure the speakers were able to provide the information you needed today so that you didn't have to drive miles and miles and miles to Raleigh. Like I said, we want to provide future events in the coming months. We will also provide a link, which I provided earlier, and we'll provide it in the email, that will have a link to a web page on our OSBM website. And that information includes, or that web page includes a lot of information on the Census Bureau programs, a lot of information on the CQR, redistricting, and differential privacy, including some overviews specific to North Carolina. We will also provide a link to the YouTube recordings and slide decks of today's events. And I thank you for your time and look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.